Rishi Sunak's promotion of Lee Anderson has prompted a heated debate about class and culture in Britain. Anderson, now Tory party deputy chair, has made headlines for his socially conservative views and actions. These include an insistence people can feed themselves for 30p a meal, the targeting of the trans comedian Eddie Izzard on Twitter, and most recently, his support for the death penalty on the basis that, quote, nobody has ever committed a crime after being executed and 100% success rate. Unsurprisingly, Anderson's appointment provoked a fair amount of concern from the left, but the right are fighting back. Take a look at this commentator on GB News.
This appointment is a really smart move from Rishi Sunak, and so long as it goes well, it's probably their only chance of doing reasonably well in the Red Wall, because Lee Anderson is very popular with that demographic for obvious reasons. And now I absolutely adore Lee Anderson. I think that he's wonderful. I agree with him on most things.
Go on, what does it for you?
I do not agree with him on the death penalty, though, for the same reasons as you just described. I don't think that you can ever really be fully sure enough to sentence somebody to death, although he has made the point that in the case of, say, someone like the murder of Lee Rigby, that if something is caught on camera, you can be absolutely sure. But for me, it's more that I don't think that the state should ever have the right to be able to execute
we already do it at battle.
That's true, but I think the ethics of war are a very different thing to punishment in a domestic sense. But I think there are so many things that I agree fundamentally with Lee Anderson on. I think that he really understands the working classes, which is my own background. I think that his comments recently also to do with net zero and people being fed up of that. And I think that's something you're seeing across the world, increasing discontent with the way that net zero policies are actually affecting people's daily lives, particularly when everybody is really feeling a squeeze right now. So I think Lee Anderson is really a man of the people. He understands the base in the Red Wall, the people who famously lent the Conservatives their vote in 2019, in a way that the rest of the leadership of the party just simply don't understand. So I think it's a fantastic appointment, even if I don't agree with him on the death penalty. But we shouldn't demonise people in the way that I think he has been, when people calling him 30p Lee and things like that. I think a lot of that is actually just old-fashioned snobbery.
Now, the 30p Lee thing, I don't see how that's snobbery, because he's there trying to mock poor people, not the other way around. In any case, that was the Conservative commentator Emma Webb. The views she expressed there are shared by a bunch of her peers. I'll just show you Ian Martin. He's a columnist at The Times and editor of Reaction. That's an online magazine. He tweeted, "This wasn't the Twitter pile-on Anderson revealing, this is 7 years since the referendum and still very little reflection about what happened and why." And then you got Dan Hodges from the Mail on Sunday replying, "Precisely, it's staggering."
First of all, that GB News clip, I've never seen so much garbage packed into less than a minute in all my life. That it was terrible. With Lee Anderson, I think it's snobbery, but not in the way that everyone thinks, the criticism of him. I think that the snobbery comes when you try and associate Lee Anderson with the North, as Emma Webb was trying to do, the man of the Red Wall, as GB News like to paint him out as. And he's not. That is swallowing Lee Anderson's rhetoric, which suggests that actually Northerners are Neanderthals. Lee Anderson's he's from the Midlands anyway, so people from former industrial towns are Neanderthals. I saw that comment over the weekend. When in reality, that's a complete distortion. In the same way that Emma Webb suggesting that people are fed up with net zero is a figment of the imagination. There's universal support for measures to tackle climate change included in the Red Wall. And you just have to look at the latest polling from the British Social Attitude Survey. 61% of Northerners are left-wing, more than people from the South. In terms of liberal values, 56% of people from the North and 57% of people from the Midlands either rank as liberal or somewhere in between liberal and authoritarian. So Lee Anderson is not the man of the North in any way. And I think to believe that is actually playing into his game and is showing a wider snobbery towards the North and probably people's underlying assumptions about the Red Wall.
I kind of accept what you're saying. I'm very sympathetic to it. I do want to show you, potentially some polling that might problematize this slightly. So this is from YouGov. I think they did it very recently. So this is from January this year. They asked, should the death penalty be reintroduced for cases of multiple murder? And we're looking here at the population as a whole. 52% of people say it should be, and 36% of people say it shouldn't be. So he's on the side of the majority of people on that question. On the question of where these ideas are concentrated. So if you look at London, which is normally, we're told is the metropolitan Remainer elite place, 46% of people oppose the death penalty. In cases of multiple murder, only 37% support. And then if we look at the breakdown for the north of England, you've got 58% of people support the death penalty in this situation and 31% of people oppose the death penalty in that situation. So, I don't want to read too much into that poll, but you can see how there might be some people who suggest that these opinions do put Lee Anderson to some degree more in line with opinions in the north of Britain than in places such as London. How would you respond to that, Sam?
As I've written in the book, London's very much an outlier in the UK in terms of social values as a whole. So London doesn't conform to even the broadest or the broader southwest. So I think it's quite tricky to compare London to other parts of the country. I'd say, if you're going to put Lee Anderson in the bracket of, your average man in the north, I think that's probably a bit of a stretch. I'd say that plenty, but it's the same as the Brexit debate, to be honest with you. It was written up as, this red wall revolt when the southeast delivered more Brexit voters than any other region comfortably. So I think that we need to widen our understanding of region and particularly regional prejudice in this country, because unfortunately there are still lots of regional, there are still lots of biases. There are still lots of reactionary views in, regions that typically aren't maligned in the way that the North and the Midlands are.
In the discussion about Brexit, and I suppose now discussion about the Red Wall, I think sort of discussion about this in its most crude form says, oh yeah, that's where all the reactionaries live. I think in the more kind of nuanced form, you say, look, there are lots of groups of people with socially conservative views in Britain. You've got older pensioners in the south east, older homeowners in the southeast, or in the southwest, etc., etc. But there's this key group of voters who used to vote Labour, who are economically left-wing, but socially conservative. So, older white people potentially with manual jobs in the past, who have become this important group of swing voters because they align with the Labour Party on economics and maybe align with the Tories on social issues. And I suppose the idea that Sunak's strategists are thinking is that the reason they won in 2019 is because they had a candidate who could neutralise the economics question, because, at least explicitly, he wasn't particularly economically right-wing. I'm talking about Boris Johnson, of course, and socially was socially conservative. And I think Sunak is hoping that Lee Anderson is going to provide a similar symbol. Is there anything to that at all?
It's the 20% strategy, isn't it? It's the coming third strategy behind the Liberal Democrats at the minute. It strikes me that if we had an election today, that it would be a very different conversation tomorrow about this. We'd be talking about the resurgence of progressive views in this country, the rejection of the culture war. And the fact is that, insofar as Brexit has been a forever war for the commentariat, I think that people have actually changed their views relatively quickly on it. They were cemented during that period when there was the parliamentary prevarications about Brexit. They wanted to see Brexit done, which is why Boris Johnson won in 2019. But now that it's actually been delivered, I think people are looking at Brexit with fresh eyes and are saying, actually, what Brexit epitomised and what it has delivered, I don't necessarily agree with. And I think that voters are not quite as staunch, are not quite as, and those reactionary voters that you talk about, I don't think they are quite as hardline as many people write them out to be, and they've changed their minds on a lot of these things.
I want to talk about one more element of this story, which is party management. So this is from, apologies to our audience for reading from The Sun. This is Lee Anderson penned a piece about why he left the Labour Party, and I just think this quote is relevant to this discussion. So he wrote this: last week, before Prime Minister Rishi Sunak appointed me, I was interviewed by a magazine. I told them that I thought we should have the death penalty for people like the terrorists who killed Lee Rigby. The response was predictable and revealing. And he goes on, the London media, people with hashtags and flags in their Twitter biographies, and lefty politicians were outraged at what is, in my neck of the woods, a completely mainstream view. By contrast, my bosses, the PM and Conservative Party chairman, said that while they didn't agree with me, the party was a broad church and that I was hardly expressing a fringe view. This is why I have found my natural home with the Conservatives. Now, I wanted to ask you about this, Sam, because to me, actually, this seems kind of like a sensible approach to politics. Like, obviously, I disagree with the death penalty, but I don't think you shouldn't be able to engage in mainstream politics if you disagree with me. And I think what this reminded me of is sort of like how the Labour Party seems to take a completely different approach, where they sort of say, if you even have a different position on Israel-Palestine, you have to apologise or lose the whip. And I think it does seem a bit more grown up to have a politician say, look, he disagrees with me, but that's fine. It's not exactly a fringe opinion, as we showed in the opinion polls. You know, it's arguably a majority opinion, so we're not going to discipline the guy. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, thinking about political strategy, what Trump and Johnson have shown us is that you've just got to roll with it. Like, as soon as you deny and as soon as you apologize, unfortunately, you admit defeat. And I think that plurality of views is a good thing, you know, especially when a majority of the population support it. I would question if, you know, we saw those figures drop considerably and it was a minority view, whether I would like someone with those views to be part of the governing party. I'm not sure. But I think the tentative approach that Labour's taken, you're absolutely spot on with. And I think Labour hasn't necessarily learned the lessons of the past few years of populist politics, and it hasn't adapted its strategy to the same effect. And that's going to cause it to really get caught up in the media narrative, and it won't be as effective as Lee Anderson is, unfortunately. You know, he presents himself as a man, but he's a mouse. And Labour's getting beaten. He's on the front page of all the papers and Labour's not, unfortunately. And so it's got to get smart to it.